Hi there, and welcome to the Salted Pepper, where we cook for real life using real food and we keep it real simple. And today I'm going to show you how to make a super easy and extremely delicious chicken and dumplings. And the way I make my dumplings might be a little bit different than you're used to, so stick around for that. The first thing we're going to do is get the Ninja Foodi turned on, sear saute on high, and hit the start button. And we're going to put in 2 tablespoons of butter. No need to even let that melt or anything. Just go ahead and throw in your vegetables. Now I'm making a half of a batch of the chicken and dumplings. So my written recipe is going to be double these amounts, but I've made it so many times in the testing that our freezer's full of chicken and dumplings. So I decided to just cut this one down to a half of a batch. So what I have here is a half of a cup of celery and about a half of a cup of carrots. And they are both cut in about a 1/4 inch slice. We're gonna put those in. And then we're gonna add in, this is a half of an onion, and it's a little over a half of a cup of onion. So we're gonna put that in. That's diced, about a 1/4 inch dice as well. Now you can make your vegetables a little bit smaller if you like, but I think chicken and dumplings, you wanna see those vegetables. You want it to be a hearty kind of soup or stew, because I think it's more like a stew, if you ask me. All right, so let's let that butter melt and the vegetables sauteing a little bit. We're gonna add in just a tiny bit of seasoning. And this is something that you're gonna have to use your judgment with, because I'm using a combination of bone broth and also some homemade stock that I made when I pressure cooked the chicken. So this is super flavorful and really seasoned up, so I don't need as many spices. So if you're using a plain chicken broth or even a bone broth that doesn't quite have as many seasonings in it, you might want to add a little bit more salt and pepper. But this is 1/8 of a teaspoon of pepper that's coarsely ground and a 1/4 of a teaspoon of salt, and that's it. So it's very small amounts. But again, if you're using some other kind of stock, then it's not homemade, it won't have as much flavor. So you might even add in like a pinch of dried thyme into that. All right, let me put this over here real quick. All right, so what I have here is a half of a chicken that I pressure cooked the other night, and this is the leftover. So this is a great recipe to make with leftover chicken if you want to make a small batch like I'm doing today. If you have a half of the chicken, you're good to go. Even a little bit less would be fine. Or you could pressure cook a whole chicken or get a rotisserie chicken at the store. This is a great use for a rotisserie chicken. Just grab it, then you're just going to take the meat off, take the skin off. Now don't throw those away though. Put those into a bag, put them in the freezer. When you have about 3 to 4 pounds of bones and skin from your chicken, make your own bone broth. It is absolutely delicious and super easy to do in the Ninja Foodi. All right, so I'm just gonna get the skin off of my chicken breast. Kind of pull it out a little bit. It comes apart very easily here. Put that to the side. We'll work on the chicken breast first. So what I'm gonna do is just kind of crack, there's like a little bone here, I'm just cracking it so that I can kind of get the bones off of this chicken breast. So there we have a chicken breast, and here is the chicken tender. That's what everybody goes crazy about. So we're gonna pull that out, and just make sure that there's no more good usable meat, and it looks like we've got most of it, so that's good. All right, so I'm just gonna put that over there. And for this, what I'm doing, I'm not gonna cut them, I'm not gonna dice it up, I'm just gonna pull it apart. I want kind of rough edges because I want this to be rustic, but you could dice it up too. So I'm just pulling it apart into little pieces, and we're gonna throw that in the pot as well. Get the rest of the skin off and break this in half. Now there's usually another little cartilage here that I just pull off. That can go into the bone broth as well. And there's one little bone usually right about here, or cartilage, and I think I must have left it on the actual breastbone, so that's good. But there's a little piece here I want to get off. There you go. And I'm just gonna shred this, pull it in half, shred it, and put it in. Now be careful, make sure you don't have any bones in there. Nobody wants to bite into a bone when they're eating their chicken and dumplings. All right. I'm not even worried about the size of these really. Just kind of breaking it off. Now the pot is sizzling, so we're sauteing our vegetables, which is great. We're only gonna go under pressure for 2 minutes. So like I said, this is a really simple dish to make. So while the pot is building pressure and pressure cooking our stew, we'll make up our dumplings. All right, so I'm pulling off the leg and I'm gonna work with the thigh here. Now, when you pull apart the thigh, this is not undercooked. It's just the color of the thigh meat. Okay, oops, is that all? Nope, that's good. All right, so there's a bone back here, so I'm just running my thumb underneath of it to pull the meat away the best I can. I'm sure there's an easier way or a different way to do this. However you're used to doing it, it's perfectly fine. All right, that looks pretty good. Oh, it smells so good already. Oh my goodness. Now I'm gonna have a good amount of chicken in here. That's probably about 2 cups. A full recipe calls for 3 cups of chicken. So you could probably make a full recipe with a half of a chicken. So this is gonna be some real chicken and dumpling soup, but that's okay. It'll be delicious. All right, let's get this off. Now, to me, the leg, I don't know. Maybe I'm just not a fan of chicken legs, and I think the meat is usually a little bit drier, and there's not a whole lot on here. But I'm gonna go ahead and just pull off what I can. But if some of the meat goes into my bone broth, that's okay too. It'll give good flavor. And that looks good. I could get a little more off, but I'm not gonna worry about it. And I'm not going to worry about the wing. There's not enough there. I'm going to leave that intact for my bone broth. All right, that's plenty. I could get some more off there too, but I'm going to leave that for my bone broth as well. All right, great. So I'm going to go and wash my hands up and let this saute for about another minute. We'll add in the rest of our ingredients and get that under pressure. All right, so I'm just giving this a little stir and we are ready to go under pressure. It looks fantastic. So for the half of a recipe like we're making here today, you need 4 cups of chicken broth, bone broth, your homemade stock, whatever you want to do. So I chose my homemade, which I only have a little shy of 2 cups. And then I also picked up some bone broth. Now, bone broth can be a little bit pricey. I find it worth it when you're making a stew like this. I really do. I think the extra little bit of money, if you don't want to make your own, go with a bone broth. It's got more depth of flavor, and I think that you'll be pleased with the results. So I'm going to fill this up so that it's 2 cups. We're going to go ahead and pour that in, and then another 2 cups. So a full recipe obviously would be 8 cups, which would be 2 cartons. And you can see the difference. Now, I don't have any regular chicken stock up here to show you, but this is much darker. It's just got a ton of flavor. So definitely for this recipe, go with the bone broth if you don't make your own. All right, so pour that in. All right, so the last ingredient we're gonna add in is some cream of celery soup. which now I don't use canned cream of celery soup. I make my own, but you can use a can. 1 cup is what we want for a half of a recipe. If I've got celery that's kind of wilting, I will make my own cream of celery soup. It is really easy in the Ninja Foodi. I will have the instructions for how to do this in the written recipe, which I will link to below this video. So you click the see more, you'll have a link, it'll go to my website, and then you can get the recipe for the cream of celery soup as well as the written recipe for the chicken and dumplings. So this is 1 cup. I'm gonna add that in on top. Now don't stir, okay? And sometimes I'll add this in and I'll have it in the freezer, and you can add it in frozen. No problems with that. But we don't want to stir it in because we don't want to combine the thickness of the cream of celery soup with the thin chicken stock or chicken broth or bone broth because we might have trouble coming under pressure. So you don't want to stir at this point. So if you're using a can, you can do 1 or 2 things. Put it on top, or you can reserve it and stir it in after the fact. And that's fine too. So you can pressure cook without the cream of celery. All right, so let's get the pressure cooking lid on the Ninja Foodi. And we're gonna go ahead and take the valve in the back to seal, and we're gonna go to pressure. High is what we want, and the time we want 2 minutes. That's it, 2 minutes. So that'll give us enough time. It'll take about 8 minutes or so for the pot to come up to pressure, 2 minutes of pressure cook. We can do an immediate release. So we will make up the dumplings. They'll be ready to go in, and dinner is ready in no time at all. All right, so let's make some dumplings. Now, there are 2 different kinds of dumplings, which I only consider they're one kind of dumplings, and that's drop dumplings. But also people put a noodle type of dumpling into their chicken and dumplings. This is a drop type of dumpling. It's super easy to make. Some of the ingredients might be different from what you're used to seeing, but trust me, it is absolutely the lightest, the fluffiest, little pillow of joy that you will ever have in a chicken and dumpling soup. Because I've got to confess, I'm not a fan of chicken and dumplings. I don't like to bite into a big dough ball. So I wanted to create something that was light and fluffy and flavorful, and that would pair perfectly with the chicken and vegetable stew kind of dish that we have going on. So let's get started with that. It's super easy to do. So even if you're used to using canned biscuits, give this a try. You'll be very surprised. It's super easy. So I am going to sift my flour because I want to aerate it. I want it to be nice and light and keep those dumplings nice and light, so no clumps. So I'm just going to take a tablespoon or 2. You can use any kind of sifter. I have a bigger one where I could dump the whole thing in, but it is being washed. So I'm going to use this small one, which works perfectly fine. Just takes a few minutes longer. And I'm not dumping it in because I know I would miss. So that's why I'm using a tablespoon here to scoop it in. I'm not going to worry about sifting the salt. I'm using a fine grind sea salt. It would get caught up in here, so I'm just going to pour it in afterwards. All right, 1 or 2 more of these to go. Our pot's about to come to pressure. I can hear it. It's starting to release a little bit of steam like it does. And that red button is about to pop up. So that took maybe 8 minutes, not even probably. It was pretty quick. All right, perfect. All right, so to the flour, I'm going to be adding in a half of a tablespoon of baking powder. This is what's going to allow our dumplings to kind of puff and become nice and light and, as we call it, leavened. And this is a half a teaspoon of sea salt. So I'm just going to put that in. Very small amount. Again, I'm making a half of a batch. All right, so let me just mix this up a little bit here. And then we're gonna cut in our butter. Now this is 2 tablespoons of salted butter, and I cut it up and I put it in the freezer so it's nice and cold. We're gonna cut this into the flour like we do when we make biscuits. And if you wanna make biscuits, I have got a great homemade biscuit recipe, and I'll link to that right up there. pour this all in. And you want to use either a pastry cutter or a fork or something to combine the butter with the flour, and it will start to resemble a coarse crumble. And we are under pressure, but we haven't started the countdown yet. So this is like perfect timing, because by the time you make the dumplings, the Ninja Foodi will be done cooking the chicken stew part of it, and you'll be able to plop them in, let them simmer for a few minutes to get all the flour cooked through, and you'll be eating your chicken and dumplings. All right, that looks good. Make sure I get all that good butter. Now, some chicken and dumpling recipes call for an egg. I didn't do that because I feel like it might make it a little heavier. I wanted a really light dumpling. All right, so the next thing we're gonna add in is some fresh thyme. This is just regular English thyme, and I'm gonna add in about 1.5 teaspoons to 2 teaspoons. I'm just gonna pull these right off the stem. Now, if you didn't have fresh thyme and you didn't want to buy it from the store, you could certainly use dried thyme leaves. That would work as well. The rule of thumb is use 1/3 of the amount. So I would use probably like 1/4 teaspoon or maybe a heaping 1/4 teaspoon if you're making a half of a batch. If you're making a full batch, then I would do about 1/2 teaspoon of the dried thyme leaves, not ground thyme. You want the leaves. All right, and I'm just eyeballing this. It's not, you know, if you go over or under a little bit, it's not going to make that much difference. But this adds a great flavor to the dumpling. And they also look pretty because you can see like the little bits of green in there. Not just like a big dough ball. All right. Now you could also throw some fresh thyme into your the chicken stew, whatever you want to call it, in the Ninja Foodi before you go under pressure, or afterwards stir some in if you wanted to use some extra thyme in there, especially if you don't make your own bone broth. That will give a nice flavor. Mine was already really well seasoned, so I didn't do that. Okay, so we have 1 tablespoon of sour cream that we're going to put in here. I made like a little well in the middle. That's not necessary though, you can dump it right on top. And oh, before we get to mixing, so we have gone under pressure for the 2 minutes. I'm gonna go ahead and do an immediate release. All right, the red button depressed, so we have released all the pressure. We can open up the pot. I'm gonna do this away from me so that the steam doesn't come towards my face. I encourage you to do that as well. This pot is very hot. It looks beautiful. Oh my gosh, it looks so good. So what we're gonna do here is just give it a stir to combine that cream of celery soup throughout. All right, good. And now, because we're gonna be dumping in or dropping in our dumplings, we want to keep this hot. And keep warm isn't going to be quite hot enough for what we want. So I'm gonna take it over to the sear saute, and high might be a little much for right now, so I'm gonna go to medium and hit start. So that's gonna keep the heating element on the bottom, heating this stew. I'm gonna call it stew because it's not really soup to me, it's stew. It's gonna keep it heating up because we want it to be boiling or at least simmering rapidly when we put in the dumplings. So, okay, we have the sour cream in here with our dry flour mixture. And what I'm gonna do is add in 1 tablespoon of half and half. Probably gonna end up using about 2 tablespoons of half and half for the half of the recipe, so go ahead, I'll put in 2. They were just a little shy of 2 tablespoons, so I might have to add a little more. But what you want to do is stir until it comes together in just like a very loose dough, because we're going to press it together and then form our dumplings. This is another dough that you don't want to overwork, which is good news. That means we don't really need it that much. All right, I think I need just a tad bit more of the half and half. For a full batch, I put in 1/4 cup of half and half. So I think, you know, it should be about 2 tablespoons, but it looks a little dry, so I'm gonna add just a little bit more. All right, that looks like it's coming together pretty well. So now I'm gonna go ahead and just dump this out onto my cutting board. I didn't even flour the surface. You can certainly do that if you'd like. I just don't really feel like it was necessary for this. And I still might have to add in a little bit more of that half and half. So use your judgment. You want it to be a dough that will fold together and not be crumbly, but you don't want it too wet. And I think this is just a little too crumbly still. So I'm gonna go ahead and just push it down here and add a little bit more. But add a small amount at a time, because if you go overboard, you'll end up with a wet dough, and you don't want that either. Now I'll just fold that in. That's coming together a little better. And I am really just folding to incorporate. I'm not gonna knead or push or do much working with the dough at all. I just want all the flour to be combined into the dough. And if I feel like I need a little bit more half and half, I'll put it in. And I might. See, it's still a little crumbly there. So let's just go ahead and put another little bit in, and that should do it though. So I probably ended up using about 3 tablespoons all together. I'll be careful so I don't get it all over the cutting board. Here we go. Kind of just combine it. There we go. All right, now it's coming together, good. And our soup there, our stew, is looking good too. All right, so it's a nice soft dough. It's come together, looks good. Not gonna worry about any of that. I can push it in, but not gonna worry about it. Okay, so now the easy part. Now we're just gonna make some dumplings. So what I usually do is just sort of make it into like a little rope. Now, remember, when you're making dumplings, they are going to puff up quite a bit. So you want to make them on the small side if you want them to be bite-sized pieces. Now, if you want them bigger, you can certainly make this a little bit bigger. But what I do is just kind of make it around like this, and I just pull off. So I'm gonna pull off like this much. I don't worry about working with it. I don't ball it up or anything, because this is what's gonna keep it nice and light and fluffy. And then you just throw it in. So they're about the size of a dime, is the way I like them. Again, you can make them any way you like, but let me pull this one out that's already puffed up so that you can really see how big they get. So that little dime size has already puffed up to be a nice size bite. And then just do that with the rest of the dough. It doesn't matter if they're exact either, okay? If some are bigger, some are smaller, not gonna matter. Now, if you make some really small and some really big, you're gonna have to cook the stew longer. You need to get the bigger ones cooked through. Oh, this is fun. I never thought I'd have fun making chicken and dumpling soup, because it always sounded like something I wouldn't even like to eat. But, oh boy, this one is so delicious. And I really hope you make these dumplings, because they are amazing. They're really puffing up in there. What I like to do is just go ahead and let this stew simmer for about 10 to 15 minutes. Then give one of the dumplings a taste, and make sure you don't taste any flour. If you taste some flour or it tastes doughy, they're not done yet, so just simmer it a little bit longer. The other thing you could do at this point, if you're not gonna eat right away, is you could put it on the slow cook function on high and just leave it like that for a little bit. And once it's cooked, you can put them on, you can put it on the keep warm function too. And this reheats beautifully. I haven't frozen it yet though, so I don't know about that, but I know it reheats beautifully, and the dumplings do not get overdone. It's really wonderful. have mentioned how much flour I had. It's 3/4 of a cup of flour that I used. So the full recipe calls for 1.5 cups. And this is making about 8 cups of soup. So maybe even a little bit more than that. So I would say this is a good 6 to 8 servings of the chicken and dumpling soup. But you could double it. I have made a double batch. And it's fine. In the 6.5 quart, because that's what I'm using, 6.5 quart. I always get that question. So, because sometimes everything looks like a little bit bigger on camera. So people wonder, am I using the 8 quart? Because it seems like I can put a lot of food in there. And I always cook with the 6.5 quart unless I specify, like I did in my homemade yogurt. I use the 8 quart because that's what I had ready to go, and I could tie that up longer. And if you're interested in making yogurt, that's delicious too. I will link to that recipe right up there. All right, so we are finished plopping these in. They look beautiful. Just gonna give them a nice little stir, and I'm gonna turn the heat down. Now, one of them actually just fell apart because I stirred it too soon, but that's okay. It'll still be delicious. So let them set up before you give it a stir, which I usually do. But I just put that last one in and I just stirred it around too fast. So you want to let them cook and puff up and set up before you stir. All right, so I'm going to bump the heat down now to, let's go down to low medium and just let this simmer for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll give it a taste. So I simmered the chicken and dumpling stew for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then I put it down to low because it was really boiling. So now it's just on low, and you could keep it that way for quite some time. Or you could turn it to the slow cook function, or you could turn it on keep warm if you weren't gonna serve it right away. And it'll be just fine. All right, so let's dig in. It looks so beautiful. Let's just dig in some of this and get a nice bowl of the chicken and dumplings. Now you could garnish this as well with some fresh thyme. That would look absolutely beautiful. I'm not gonna worry about it because I used all my fresh thyme that I had gotten from our greenhouse in the dumplings, so I'm not gonna worry about that. All right, let's dig in. It's gonna be hot though, so I'm gonna have to be careful. So let's taste this broth. First of all, the broth with the cream of celery soup is like just thick and delicious, but still, I mean, not so thick that it's real heavy. It's like velvety deliciousness. Oh my gosh. This is even better than like just plain old chicken noodle soup. This is fantastic. All right, let's get a celery and a carrot. See if they're cooked perfectly. Perfect. Okay, now for the star of the show, our little dumpling. Now it should be light and fluffy, kind of melt in your mouth, and it should not taste doughy at all. So let's see if we accomplish that. I am now a fan of chicken and dumplings. And so is my husband. And when I told him I was gonna test this recipe, he was like, that's not my thing. I'm like, well, it's not my thing either, but people love it and they're asking me for it, so I'm gonna do it. And we were both amazed at how delicious this came out. And the chicken in here is superb. Everything about it is perfect. It's seasoned perfectly. But again, if you taste it and you need more salt, add some more salt. You can add pepper, you can add some more dried thyme. I mean, definitely customize it to your taste and serve it up and enjoy. You saw how easy it was to make those dumplings from scratch. I really encourage you to give it a try. Not only are they 10 times better than prepackaged, you made them yourself. This is 100% homemade chicken and dumplings. You're gonna love it.